He didn't just read the will. He read a warning, a prophecy, and a threat. That's how one anonymous insider reportedly described the moment Billy Crystal, beloved comedian, actor, and longtime best friend of Rob Reiner, stood before the surviving members of the Reiner family, clutching a thick, trembling envelope marked private. To be read by Billy only. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What was inside would not only split the room in half, it would split an entire family. Because Rob Reiner, the legendary director behind The Princess Bride, A Few Good Men, and This Is Spinal Tap, had left behind more than just an estate worth tens of millions. He left behind suspicions, warnings, and a plan that didn't include his own son, Nick Reiner, who now sits in a Los Angeles jail cell, accused of stabbing both his parents to death in the early hours of a quiet Sunday morning. A family once held together by legend, now ripped apart by murder. Rob Reiner wasn't just a filmmaker. He was Hollywood royalty. The son of Carl Reiner, comedy legend. The ex-husband of Penny Marshall, sitcom queen. The father of 5. The husband of Michelle Singer Reiner for over 3 decades. He was beloved, respected, resilient. And then he was gone, stabbed to death alongside his wife, Michelle, in what prosecutors are calling a premeditated, first-degree domestic double homicide. And the man they arrested at the scene? Their own son, Nick Reiner, 32 years old. The public shock and a private nightmare. The headlines hit like a sledgehammer. Hollywood icon Rob Reiner found dead, son arrested. Nick Reiner faces death penalty in parents' murder. And behind those headlines, behind the candlelit vigils and celebrity tributes, a darker story was unfolding. Because the Reiner family's tragedy wasn't just personal, it was legal, financial, and deeply, deeply divisive. At the center of that division, a last will and testament, a voice recording, and a rule that few outside legal circles have ever heard of, but that now threatens to erase Nick Reiner from his father's empire forever. The shocking rule no one saw coming. Have you ever heard of the Slayer statute? Most people haven't. But now, it's about to become one of the most talked about legal concepts in celebrity history. Here's the brutal truth. If you are found to have intentionally killed the person who left you money in a will, you don't get a dime. Period. That's exactly what Nick Reiner is up against. He was reportedly one of the primary heirs to Rob and Michelle Reiner's estate, a fortune that includes royalties, residuals, real estate, production rights, and investments that could easily exceed $50 million. But now, if convicted, he won't see a single penny, not even a courtroom snack paid for by the estate. And according to attorney Sean Weisbart, who specializes in high-value estate litigation but is not connected to the Reiner case, even Nick's defense team can't touch the Reiner money. So who can? And what did Billy Crystal read that made Tracy Reiner, Rob's oldest daughter from his first marriage, storm out of the room, shaking? The questions no one wants to ask, but everyone is. Let's not pretend this is a simple story, because behind every headline lies 100 contradictions. Was Nick really the killer, or is he being framed? Was the family at peace, or were they keeping up a facade for the cameras? Was Rob Reiner preparing for his death, or had he simply lost faith in his son? And here's the biggest question of all. What did Rob know, and when did he know it? Because sources close to the investigation claim Rob had recently updated his will. Not months ago, weeks, right before his death. And not just that. He had reportedly recorded an audio message, found locked in a private safe, addressed directly to his family, and possibly to law enforcement. And what about Nick? Was he the wayward son struggling with addiction and depression, desperate for love? Or had something inside him snapped, something that saw his parents as obstacles instead of protectors? Either way, one thing is clear. The family is fractured beyond recognition. From Hollywood fairy tale to true crime tragedy. Once upon a time, the Reiners were a picture of Hollywood perfection. Rob, the idealistic filmmaker. Michelle, the humanitarian. Their children raised in a world of art, activism, and influence. Billy Crystal once called them a lighthouse for the rest of us. Now, that lighthouse is dark, and standing in the ruins is a legacy at war with itself, fought in courtrooms, on front pages, and in the haunting silence of Rob's final words. This isn't just a story about murder. It's a story about betrayal, money, legacy, and love. And it's not over. Not even close. Because when Billy Crystal opened Rob's sealed instructions at the will reading, what he found wasn't just a list of names and numbers. He found a final message. One written not for the world, not for the lawyers, but for the family. And that message, according to those who were in the room, contained one final twist that nobody, not even Nick, could have predicted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the people who seem to have it all are hiding the most painful truths behind the scenes? The Reiner family wasn't just respected, they were adored. By the industry, by fans, by fellow Hollywood icons. They were the image of stability in an industry notorious for breakdowns and divorces. Rob and Michelle were married for over 30 years, a rarity in the glittering world of celebrity couples. He, the brain behind some of cinema's most quoted lines. She, the gentle force behind numerous humanitarian causes. Together, they created a family that seemed, from the outside, to be built on love, laughter, and the kind of creative DNA that spanned generations. But what happens when that image begins to fracture? What happens when the spotlight fades, and behind closed doors, reality creeps in? Let's rewind. A Hollywood dynasty is born. Rob Reiner wasn't just a filmmaker. He was Hollywood legacy personified. The son of comedic trailblazer Carl Reiner, one of the original kings of American television, Rob grew up in the golden age of laughter. He inherited his father's timing, his bite, and above all, his ability to command a room. He starred in All in the Family as Michael Meathead Stivic. But that was just the beginning. Rob would go on to direct a string of legendary films. Not just hits, cultural landmarks. When Harry Met Sally, Misery, A Few Good Men, Stand By Me. His work wasn't just entertaining, it shaped generations. He married Michelle Singer in 1989, and their life appeared to be the blueprint for Hollywood domestic bliss. They moved to a tasteful estate in Beverly Hills. They raised 3 children together, Jake, Nick, and Romy. And then, of course, there was Tracy Reiner, Rob's daughter from his earlier marriage to Penny Marshall, who was herself a powerhouse in the directing world. In many ways, the Reiners were cinema royalty. But royalty always comes with palace intrigue. And no family, no matter how dazzling, is immune to pain. Nick Reiner, the troubled prince. Nick Reiner was always different. Where Jake followed in Rob's media-savvy footsteps and Romy embraced privacy, Nick became the wild card. Creative, sensitive, brilliant in short bursts, but also chaotic. In a rare interview years ago, Rob once said about Nick, "He's got so much talent. He just needs to find peace." It was no secret that Nick battled addiction in his younger years. Rehabs, relapses, reconciliations. But through it all, Rob and Michelle stood by him, at least publicly. In 2015, Rob even helped Nick co-write a semi-autobiographical film called Being Charlie, a raw look into drug addiction, family expectations, and finding oneself. At the time, it seemed like a turning point, a reconciliation through art, a healing chapter in a complicated story. But here's the thing. Stories don't always end the way they start. The curtain begins to pull back. Despite the carefully curated public image, whispers began to circle. Not loud, not tabloid-fueled, just quiet shifts in appearances. Nick showing up at events alone. Family photos missing him. Rob subtly redirecting interviews when asked about his middle son. And then there were the rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, that Nick had been temporarily cut off financially. That he'd been removed from trust documents and then reinstated. That certain incidents had occurred behind closed doors, requiring security intervention and private settlement. Did Rob and Michelle try to keep these matters out of the public eye? Absolutely. They were seasoned professionals. They knew how to shield their family. But the deeper the shield, the darker the shadows it hides. Michelle's silent role. Michelle Singer Reiner was not the headline maker Rob was. But don't mistake that for silence. Friends describe her as the emotional spine of the family. She was fiercely intelligent, warm, protective, and deeply committed to justice, often working behind the scenes on humanitarian causes. She reportedly clashed with Nick more than Rob did. One source close to the family put it this way. Rob saw Nick through the lens of hope. Michelle saw him through the lens of reality. That difference, over time, created tension, both between husband and wife, and between mother and son. But here's where things get blurry. Did that tension ever boil over? Did Michelle fear for her safety? Or was she simply setting boundaries with a troubled adult child? And more chillingly, did she ever imagine her life could end the way it did? A family held together by history and pulled apart by truth. At birthday parties and public events, the Reiners still looked united. Jake and Nick even posed together at a Netflix screening once, though one observer noted Jake's expression seemed strained. Tracy, meanwhile, stayed largely in her own world, never truly embracing the inner circle of Rob's new family with Michelle, yet never publicly distancing herself either. Was she aware of what was bubbling under the surface? Or had she, too, grown used to the delicate dance of appearances over substance? In Hollywood, you don't always confront the cracks in the foundation. You repaint the walls and keep smiling. But even the best facade can't withstand a violent quake. Was Rob aware? Or in denial? Now, here's the contradiction. On the one hand, Rob was a doting father. He stood by Nick when others wouldn't. He fought for him, hired therapists, paid for treatments, and even collaborated with him artistically. On the other hand, the very existence of a sealed voice recording, one that warned of betrayal, suggests that Rob may have suspected the unimaginable. Could he have loved his son and still feared him? Could he have updated his will, assigned trustees, and prepared legal protections while still hoping for a miracle? This is the heartbreaking duality of parenthood, the tug-of-war between love and logic. And maybe Rob Reiner, the man who built cinematic universes, simply couldn't write a better ending for his own family. But the real story didn't begin with the will. It began with a final family dinner. And it would be the last time Rob, Michelle, and Nick were ever seen in the same room. December 21st, a quiet Saturday, just days before Christmas. The Reiners held a private dinner at their Beverly Hills estate. No public photos, no formal event, just family. Jake flew in from New York. Romy was already in town. Tracy was invited but declined, or was never invited at all, depending on who you ask. And Nick? He was there. According to one staff member who later spoke anonymously to reporters, Nick arrived late and left early. He seemed off, the source recalled. Like agitated. Like he didn't want to be there, but had to show face. Others said he barely touched his food. Some claimed he had a quiet but tense exchange with Michelle. Hushed voices, narrowed eyes, and a slammed glass. Rob, ever the mediator, allegedly tried to defuse the mood. He raised a toast. He said something about new beginnings. What did he mean by that? Was he talking about the new year? A new family chapter? Or had he already decided to cut Nick out of the will and was bracing himself for the fallout? We don't know. But what we do know is this. That dinner was the last time Rob and Michelle Reiner were seen alive. 3 days later, they were gone. Aftermath of a crime scene. On the morning of December 24th, emergency services received a 911 call from Jake Reiner. He had reportedly come to the house to drop off a holiday gift, only to find the front door slightly ajar. Inside, horror. Rob and Michelle found dead in their private study, both stabbed multiple times. No signs of forced entry. No valuables missing. Nothing stolen. Police later found Nick in the guest house. He was reportedly in a dazed state, with injuries on his hands and clothing soaked in blood. Initial reports claimed he was incoherent. Then came the booking, the mugshot, the charge. 2 counts of first-degree murder. And just like that, the family that once symbolized creative genius and generational love became the center of a legal and emotional firestorm. A legacy under attack. Rob Reiner had spent decades building a legacy that went far beyond Hollywood. He was an outspoken political activist, a philanthropist, a speaker for justice. Now, news anchors couldn't say his name without adding the word murdered next to it. Memorials were canceled. Award season tributes grew awkward. No one wanted to talk about the elephant in the room, a son accused of killing the very parents who supported him through his darkest hours. And still, no one could figure out what had really triggered the collapse. Was it resentment? Was it about money? Was it years of pressure finally boiling over? Or was there another hand in all of this? One that remained unseen? Because even at this point in the story, even after a double homicide, we have to ask, was Nick Reiner the killer, or was he just the perfect scapegoat? The curious case of trust and distrust. Here's where things get strange. According to legal experts, Rob and Michelle Reiner likely had a revocable trust, a legal structure used to distribute assets discreetly and avoid probate. Normally, this kind of trust would be managed by designated trustees, often children, lawyers, or trusted friends. But get this. It appears Rob and Michelle specifically appointed trustees with legal powers to exclude anyone under suspicion of criminal activity. That's a strong move, a strategic move, a defensive move, and it raises a chilling possibility. Were they already preparing for the possibility that Nick might turn violent? And if so, what exactly did they know that made them think that was even possible? Why would two parents, with decades of love invested in their child, write him out of their plans? Just weeks before their own deaths? That kind of premonition doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from fear. It comes from patterns. It comes from secrets. The fragility of fame. There's something especially tragic about watching a public family fall apart in real time. We're used to seeing celebrities struggle, but not like this. Not murdered in their own home. Not betrayed by their blood. Not exposed through courtroom filings and forensic analysis. Rob Reiner directed one of the most iconic lines in movie history. You can't handle the truth. But maybe the most haunting truth is that he may have seen this coming all along and still couldn't stop it. Isn't that the cruelest irony? That a man who spent his life telling stories of courage, morality, and redemption may have died in the middle of a story he could never finish? A family split at the core. Today, the Reiner family is fractured. Jake, the polished journalist, has gone silent on social media. Romy, known for her artistic inclinations, has posted cryptic black and white images. Tracy, who had remained distant from the core family unit, is suddenly taking a visible role, appearing in court, speaking to attorneys, defending her father's legacy. And Nick? Nick sits behind bars, awaiting arraignment, a lawyer by his side, and a possible death sentence hanging over his head. But the real mystery is in what he's not saying. Because so far, Nick has refused all public comment. No apology, no denial, no explanation, just silence. But everything changed when the family gathered again. This time, not for a holiday, but for the reading of the will. And in that room, with Billy Crystal standing in front of them, the truth began to emerge. One sentence at a time. What really happened behind those walls, before the screams stopped? That's the question haunting everyone from celebrity circles to courtroom analysts. December 24th, early morning hours. A holiday wrapped in horror. Rob and Michelle Reiner, two pillars of Hollywood royalty, were found murdered in the study of their Beverly Hills estate. Stabbed. Silent. Gone. Their son Nick Reiner, 32 years old, was discovered just steps away, in the guest house. Barefoot. Dazed. Blood on his clothes. But no weapon in his hands. So, what really unfolded that night? Who was the last person to see Rob and Michelle alive? And was Nick the monster in the shadows, or a man caught in someone else's deadly plan? Let's peel back the layers. The hours before, a tense silence. It started out ordinary. According to neighbors, nothing unusual stirred at the Reiner estate that night. No alarms. No arguments heard through walls. Just the soft glow of string lights and the sound of a wind chime drifting in the December breeze. But inside, something was unraveling. Sources close to the investigation say that Rob and Michelle were in their study, working late, possibly reviewing documents, possibly making a final call. One theory, they were discussing legal changes to their estate, perhaps even making adjustments in light of tensions with Nick. Here's the timeline as reconstructed by investigators. 9:15 p.m. Romy Reiner leaves the house, reportedly heading to a friend's holiday gathering. 9:42 p.m. Jake texts Rob, "Merry Christmas, Pops," and gets a thumbs-up emoji in reply. 10:18 p.m. Security camera at the rear gate captures someone walking toward the guest house. Blurry. No identifiable face. The footage cuts out 3 minutes later, a known glitch in the estate's older system. 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. No outward activity. Silent. 1:26 a.m. Rob's phone is pinged as inactive. 1:44 a.m. Michelle's phone also goes dark. 2:13 a.m. A light flickers on in the hallway near the study, visible from a neighbor's window. 2:37 a.m. According to leaked reports, Nick is found unconscious by police in the guest house after Jake discovers the bodies and calls 911. There were no signs of a break-in, no screams heard, no shattered glass, just stillness before chaos. The discovery: I think they're gone. Jake Reiner was the one who found them. He arrived early in the morning, hoping to surprise his parents with a breakfast delivery and gifts. He let himself in through the front gate, as he often did, but the main door was slightly ajar. He later told police something felt off the moment he stepped inside. The house was too quiet, even for that early hour. He walked toward the back hallway and stopped. The door to the study was cracked open. He called out, "Dad? Mom?" No answer. He stepped in. And what he saw was so horrific, so jarring. He reportedly stumbled back into the wall, dropping his phone. He scrambled to call 911. Here's a partial transcript of that chilling emergency call, leaked by a courthouse source. Jake, shaking, panicked, "I think they're gone. They're not breathing. There's blood. Oh my God, there's blood everywhere." Dispatcher, "Sir, stay calm. Who is it you found?" Jake, "My parents. My dad and mom." Rob Reiner, "Please, just send someone." Within minutes, sirens pierced the dawn. The crime scene, a study turned slaughterhouse. According to coroner reports, both Rob and Michelle suffered multiple stab wounds. There was no sign of struggle, suggesting they were likely caught off guard. Rob's body was found slumped over the desk. Michelle was near the door, as if she had tried to run. Blood splatter analysis suggests the attack was sudden and extremely personal. Here's the most disturbing detail. The killer didn't bring a weapon. One of the house's own kitchen knives, a chef-grade steel blade, was used. This wasn't a calculated hit. This was intimate, emotional, violent. The kind of violence that comes from within. The guest house mystery, Nick's condition. Police swept the property. Inside the guest house, barely 30 yards away, they found Nick Reiner. He was curled on the floor, shirt stained, bruises on his wrists, unresponsive at first, then reportedly muttering, I told them not to make me come here." Paramedics checked for substances. Initial tests showed no alcohol, but traces of sedatives in his system. Whether they were self-administered or given to him by someone else remains unclear. Here's where the case splits into two chilling possibilities. Nick killed his parents in a fit of rage, then sedated himself, either to numb the horror or as a coward's escape. Nick was drugged by someone else, staged as the fall guy, while the real killer vanished. Which one do you believe? Because right now, law enforcement is betting on theory number one. But some of the Reiner family's inner circle aren't so sure. The note: "She never loved me." Detectives recovered a torn page from a notepad near the guest house kitchenette. Written in Nick's handwriting, confirmed by forensic analysis, were the words, "She never loved me. She just wanted me fixed." Was it a confession? A cry for help? Or a plant? We don't know. And police aren't commenting. But it adds to the disturbing psychology of what might have driven this horrific act. If Nick felt abandoned, rejected, or dehumanized by his parents, especially his mother, could this have been the moment he snapped? Or was that note never meant to be found at all? And who left it there? But just as the world began to make sense of the scene, as public grief turned to public outrage, one piece of evidence surfaced that stopped everyone cold: the surveillance footage from 10:18 p.m. Blurry, distorted, but possibly showing a second figure, not Nick, moving through the shadows. The surveillance system at the Reiner estate wasn't state-of-the-art. It hadn't been upgraded in years, reportedly something Rob and Michelle kept postponing. That decision may have cost them dearly. At precisely 10:18 p.m., the camera positioned near the back patio gate, which connects the main house to the guest house path, flickers to life. The footage is grainy, partly due to the garden lights dimming at random intervals. But what it shows is enough to raise serious questions. A figure. Not Nick, at least not clearly. This person is taller, leaner, wearing what looks like a hoodie. They approach the guest house, disappear behind a hedge, then re-emerge near the kitchen window of the main house. And then, the camera glitches. Static. 3 full minutes missing. When the feed resumes, the figure is gone. What does this mean? Investigators initially downplayed the footage. Too blurry to be definitive, one official said. But independent analysts, including former FBI profiler Jenna Wells, raised alarms. That's not something you ignore. If there's even a shadow of doubt about a second person on the property, you follow it, especially when your only suspect was found incapacitated. Why the hesitation? Why the rush to pin this on Nick? Could it be that the case was too convenient? That a volatile, troubled son made for the perfect, media-friendly villain? Or was someone counting on exactly that? Public fury and celebrity mourning. As the media caught wind of the charges against Nick, the response was explosive. Hollywood went silent. No tributes. No long-winded Instagram eulogies. No memorial events. Not yet. It was as if everyone was frozen in collective disbelief. Rob Reiner, a man so influential, so beloved, had been murdered, allegedly by his own son. Billy Crystal issued a short, trembling statement to Variety. I am heartbroken. I don't have the words yet. Rob was my brother in this life. I loved him. I loved Michelle. My grief is beyond words. That was all he said at the time. Because Billy, like everyone else, was waiting. For the facts. For the autopsy. For answers. But most of all for the will. Autopsy reveals a chilling detail. Just days after the deaths, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office released preliminary findings. Both Rob and Michelle died from multiple stab wounds. But what caught investigators off guard was the toxicology report. Traces of zolpidem, a powerful sedative used in sleep medications, were found in both victims' systems. They had been drugged before the stabbing. The levels were high enough to cause grogginess, confusion, or even temporary paralysis in some individuals, depending on dosage and body mass. So now, the questions shift. Did Rob and Michelle take the medication voluntarily? Were they drugged during dinner? Was it slipped into wine, food, or something else? More disturbingly, who had access? Who knew their medical history well enough to dose them without killing them instantly, but enough to disarm them? Would Nick have known those things? Or was this the work of someone else, someone close, someone with precision and motive? The knife that wasn't there. Another mystery, the weapon. While bloodied clothing, prints, and hair were found near the scene, and some of it linked to Nick, the knife itself was missing. That's not just a loose end. That's a red flag. Killers rarely take the weapon unless they're trying to delay identification, avoid fingerprints, or frame someone else. Was the knife discarded, hidden, or intentionally removed before police arrived? And if Nick was as sedated and incoherent as the first responders described, how would he have been able to cleanly leave the scene, dispose of a weapon, and return to the guest house? Or was he already unconscious when the murders occurred? The theory no one wants to say out loud. It's time to ask the unthinkable. Could this have been a setup? Could someone have used Nick's instability, history of addiction, and fragile relationship with his parents as a cover to commit a murder for inheritance, revenge, or something even darker? Was this personal, or was it strategic? We know one thing. The Reiners' estate was worth tens of millions, and Rob's newly updated will, the one sealed in a fireproof envelope marked to be opened only by Billy Crystal, had reportedly restructured major parts of the inheritance. Why the secrecy? And why was that version delivered just 2 weeks before the murders? Nick had no way of knowing that. Or did he? Or was someone else watching the family closer than they ever realized? The untouched room. One final detail from the scene. Romy Reiner's childhood bedroom, the one she occasionally used when staying over, was untouched. Not a fingerprint. Not a speck of dust moved. But the door was ajar. She had left the home before the murders. But had she returned? Or had someone else entered that room and staged it to seem empty? Cameras couldn't prove it either way. And Romy hasn't spoken publicly. But friends say she's devastated and confused. Some sources even claim she privately questioned the official narrative. Which leads us back to where this all began. Because what happened next would make headlines around the world, the will was finally read. Billy Crystal stepped up, and what he read wasn't just a list of names or assets. It was a message, a warning, a final goodbye. And what it revealed would ignite the Reiner family's deepest fears. What if the most damning evidence was written in the killer's own hand? That's the question investigators and family members began whispering after a discovery in the most unexpected place. Not a security hard drive, not a phone, not a confession tape, but a leather-bound journal, tucked between 2 art books on a dusty shelf in the guest house where Nick Reiner had been staying, and where he was found in a dazed, semi-conscious state the morning his parents were murdered. The cover was cracked, its spine bent with use. And the pages inside, they weren't just disturbing. They were haunting. The discovery, a journal no one was supposed to see. It was a young forensic technician scanning the guest house room for blood traces who noticed something odd. The shelf of books was arranged in meticulous symmetry, except for one item pushed further back than the rest. When she pulled it out, her breath caught. The journal had a dark green leather cover. The initials NR faintly embossed on the bottom right corner. She handed it off to detectives immediately. The gloves came on. The photos were taken. And page by page, the entries were read. And what they found wasn't a diary of memories. It wasn't a dream journal. It wasn't rehab notes or therapy reflections. It was, by all appearances, a slow descent into darkness. Entry 1. They're done with me. The first few pages were tame. Doodles. Scribbled song lyrics. Film ideas. Odd, fragmented thoughts like a man wakes up in a home he no longer recognizes. Only the furniture remembers him. Then the tone shifted. One entry, dated 3 weeks before the murders, read, "They've decided. I'm out. They haven't said it out loud yet, but I can feel it. The way she looks at me. The way he avoids my questions. They've rewritten the script." Another, more frantic. "Dad's eyes don't lie. He pities me. She just wants me gone." Erased. Out of the picture. Then came a drawing. It was of the Reiner estate, scrawled in rough pencil lines. The main house, the guest house, the pool. Next to the study, he'd drawn a thick black X. Investigators were stunned. But this was just the beginning. The betrayal entries. Roughly 18 pages into the journal, things escalated. The handwriting changed, no longer clean, but jagged and frantic. Words scratched out and written over again. The entries began to repeat certain phrases, almost like mantras. "She's not my mother. They took what was mine. She never wanted me. It was always going to be Jake. Dad said I'd be fine." But that was a lie. Then, a single line written in thick black marker. "What if it takes blood for them to listen?" Was this a threat? A fantasy? A cry for help? Or was it the first true sign of premeditation? Mental health? Or malice? Psychiatrists brought in by the prosecution quickly labeled the entries as emotional unraveling consistent with narcissistic collapse and borderline rage. In other words, Nick wasn't just upset. He was unraveling, dangerous, enraged. But Nick's defense team argued differently. They claimed the journal wasn't evidence of guilt, but of mental illness. A paper trail of someone struggling with abandonment, identity, and emotional abuse. His lawyer, Alan Jackson, told the press, "These are not the writings of a cold-blooded killer. They're the writings of a man who was ignored, unloved, abandoned by the very people who claimed to protect him." So which is it? A motive? Or a warning sign? And more importantly, could someone else have written parts of it? The page with no date and a name. Then came the most explosive page in the entire journal. A single line, no date, no context, just red ink. "Tracy. She knows. And she lied." Tracy Reiner. Rob's daughter from his first marriage. The oldest sibling. The quietest. The one who hadn't been living at the estate. But who, reportedly, had argued fiercely with Nick about disrespecting the family in the months leading up to the tragedy. Why was her name there? Did Nick believe Tracy had something to do with the will? Did he blame her for influencing Rob's final decisions? Or worse, did she know more than she ever let on? Tracy declined to comment on the journal, but sources close to her say she was deeply shaken by the mention and immediately asked for legal counsel. What had Nick meant? And why hadn't he spoken her name out loud before? Only written it, once, in cryptic red ink. The poem, "The House Where I Died." One of the most chilling pieces was a poem, scrawled on torn notebook paper and inserted near the journal's center. The handwritten title read, "The House Where I Died." What followed was a 4-stanza piece written in childlike rhyme. "The lights are on, but no one's home. The pictures smile, but leave me alone. The hallway whispers, the shadows play. But no one ever wants me to stay." She hums to herself and locks the door. "He looks at me like I'm not there anymore. I scream inside and scratch my name. But still, they treat me like I'm the one to blame. I sleep in a house that forgot my face, a name that never earned its place. But I'll write it back in crimson red, so they remember after I'm dead. The house where I died, but never lived. The gift they took, I'll never forgive." The silence now will finally speak. Because I'm the storm, and they are weak. Investigators were horrified. Family members were stunned. But some psychologists warned, this isn't just poetry. It's prophetic language. A declaration. A metaphorical suicide note. Or a death warrant for someone else. A burned page, too damaged to read. One page, near the journal's back, had been partially burned, as if someone had tried to destroy it. The edges were black. The ink blurred. Only fragments remained. Recording, he said to Tracy. Can't protect them forever. I'll get what I deserve, one way or another. They made me sign. Wait. Sign what? Did Nick sign a legal document shortly before his parents were killed? Was he coerced into agreeing to a trust change, an amendment, a waiver? Or did he believe he was being tricked, forced into surrendering his inheritance? The defense jumped on this. They argued that if Nick had signed something under duress, something that sealed his financial fate, it could have triggered a psychotic break. But prosecutors fired back. There's no legal record of such a signing. No documents missing. This isn't about pressure, it's about vengeance. So who's telling the truth? And why was that page burned? Was it guilt? Or fear? Did Nick know about the audio message? Here's the most curious part. In a final journal entry, written just 2 days before the murders, Nick wrote, he's always had his voice. Even now, he'll never stop talking. Even when he's gone. Was this a poetic jab? Or did Nick know that Rob had left behind an audio message? And if he did, how? The voice memo, recovered after Rob's death, was sealed in a fireproof safe. But what if Nick had seen it, heard it, or even suspected what was on it? That might explain everything. Because if Nick believed his father was recording a final message, a warning, it might have felt like a betrayal too big to forgive. Or maybe a threat too dangerous to allow. Final thoughts. Was this a diary? Or a blueprint? After the journal was examined, photocopied, and submitted into evidence, one prosecutor told reporters, this isn't just emotional venting. It's a window into intent. It's motive, mindset, and method, all in one. But mental health advocates disagreed. They say the journal proves something else. That Nick Reiner was spiraling. That he needed help, not hatred. That he was surrounded by wealth, talent, and fame, and still felt utterly alone. But here's what we're left with. A journal filled with rage. A poem about blood. A drawing with an X over the study where the murders took place. And a burned page about something signed and a recording. So is this case open and shut? Or has the real story yet to be told? Because the moment Billy Crystal pressed play on Rob Reiner's final voice message, everything changed. Rob's voice, calm but grave, would reveal a side of this story that no one, not even his closest friends, had ever heard. And what he said would turn suspicion into shock. What if the real battle wasn't about guilt or innocence, but about money? What if the most terrifying weapon in this entire story wasn't a knife, a journal, or even a confession, but the law itself? Because the moment Nick Reiner was charged, something far bigger than a criminal case snapped into motion. A legal trapdoor. One that, once triggered, doesn't care about emotions, intent, or family ties. It only cares about one thing. Who benefits from death? And that's where the Slayer statute enters the story. The phrase sounds archaic, almost medieval. Slayer statute. It conjures images of old castles, inheritance battles, bloodlines severed by betrayal. But it's very real, and it's very modern. In simple terms, the Slayer statute exists to prevent one thing: a person profiting from a death they caused. The logic is brutally straightforward. You don't get rewarded for killing someone. Not with money. Not with property. Not with power. And once Nick Reiner was charged with the deaths of his parents, this law didn't wait for a verdict to start tightening its grip. It moved immediately, silently, relentlessly. Here's where many people misunderstand how inheritance works. They assume wills are like sealed treasure chests, that once your name is written down, the money is yours. But that's not how it works, especially not at this level. Rob and Michelle Reiner didn't just have a will. They had what estate attorneys call a layered structure. A will, a revocable living trust, multiple subtrusts, trustees with discretionary power. In other words, safeguards. And those safeguards were designed for exactly this kind of nightmare scenario. Within hours of Nick's arrest, the trust went into protective lockdown. Accounts frozen, distributions halted, access revoked. Not just for Nick, For everyone. Why? Because when a Slayer statute is triggered, trustees don't wait. They act first. They ask questions later. An estate attorney not connected to the case explained it like this. When there's even a possibility that an heir is legally disqualified, trustees have a duty to preserve the assets. They're not allowed to take chances. That means no advances, no loans, no legal fee payments. Which leads to the first shocking contradiction. Nick Reiner was facing life in prison, possibly worse. Yet the millions with his name once attached to them, untouchable. They could not be used to defend him. They could not be used to post bail. They could not even be used to buy him a better mattress in jail. So the question exploded across legal circles. Who is paying for his defense? Because high-profile attorneys don't come cheap. And someone, somewhere, was writing checks. But before we get there, we need to understand just how final the Slayer statute can be. Most people think it only applies after conviction. That's wrong. In many jurisdictions, the statute can be enforced provisionally, meaning, if the court believes there is substantial evidence, the accused heir is treated as legally dead for inheritance purposes until proven otherwise. Legally erased. And that's exactly what happened here. Nick Reiner went from presumed heir to legal ghost overnight. His name didn't vanish from the documents, but it was frozen in place, like a corpse in ice. Now here's where things get darker. Rob and Michelle's estate wasn't designed to be split evenly. That's important. The trust structure reportedly gave trustees broad discretion to redistribute assets if one beneficiary was disqualified. In plain language, if Nick was out, someone else was in. Which means every delay in the case, every procedural twist, every legal maneuver, wasn't just about justice. It was about who would eventually control tens of millions of dollars. And that creates motive, not just for Nick, but for anyone who stood to gain from his removal. Let's talk about the trustees. Trustees are the gatekeepers. They decide when money flows and when it stops. They interpret the trust's intent. They protect the estate from lawsuits, scandals, and public exposure. And in this case, the trustees weren't just lawyers. They included a combination of a longtime family confidant, a senior estate attorney, and one unexpected name that raised eyebrows when it surfaced in court filings. Someone close enough to the family to know their internal fractures. Someone powerful enough to influence decisions quietly. Someone who understood the difference between a will and a weaponized trust. Why does that matter? Because trustees are not neutral observers. They are active players. And once the Slayer statute is in play, their decisions can permanently reshape a family legacy. Now let's address the most uncomfortable question of all. Could Nick still inherit anything? Technically, yes, but only under one condition. He would have to be completely cleared, not acquitted on a technicality, not released due to insufficient evidence, but affirmatively proven not responsible for the deaths. Anything less, and the statute holds. Even a plea deal could disqualify him. Even a reduced charge could be enough. In other words, Nick's financial fate is tied directly to the most brutal standard of innocence imaginable. And the longer the case drags on, the more permanent that erasure becomes. Here's another twist most people don't realize. Even if Nick were somehow cleared years from now, the money might still be gone. Why? Because trusts can distribute assets while a beneficiary is frozen out, if the trust allows it. And once assets are legally transferred to other beneficiaries, they don't automatically come back. The law doesn't rewind time. So even if Nick wins his freedom, he could walk out of prison to an empty inheritance. Which raises a terrifying possibility. What if someone wanted that outcome? What if the goal was never conviction, but delay? What if all someone needed was time? This is where suspicion started to creep into private conversations. Not about Nick, but about the people around him. The people who knew the trust structure. The people who understood how long criminal cases can take. The people who would benefit from a prolonged legal limbo. Because while Nick sat in a cell, the estate was already moving. Investments reallocated. Properties reassigned. Royalties redirected. Quietly. Legally. Irreversibly. And then came the detail that truly unsettled legal experts. A clause, buried deep in the trust, rarely used, almost never invoked. A morality clause. It allowed trustees to permanently disinherit any beneficiary whose actions caused irreparable reputational harm to the family legacy. Notice something? That doesn't require a conviction. It It requires a judgment, a subjective one, made by the trustees, which means that even public perception could be enough. Even headlines, even association. Nick didn't just lose money. He lost standing. He lost voice. He lost leverage. And someone else gained all of it. This is when the family's internal dynamics became radioactive. Some relatives pushed for patience. Others wanted immediate redistribution. Some wanted silence. Others wanted distance. And at least one wanted the will read aloud. In full. Which brings us back to Billy Crystal. Because his role wasn't symbolic. It was strategic. Rob trusted him, not just as a friend, but as a witness. Someone outside the legal machine. Someone who could read the words without filtering them. And according to sources, Rob left specific instructions about when and how parts of the will should be revealed. Not immediately, not publicly, but at a moment of maximum impact. A moment when the truth would land like a hammer. Here's the final contradiction. If Nick killed his parents, the Slayer statute ensures he gains nothing. But if Nick didn't, then the statute may have already done irreversible damage anyway. Which means the law that was designed to protect justice might end up destroying it. And that leaves us with an impossible question. Was this tragedy the result of violence? Or was it the result of a system that rewards silence, delay, and legal complexity? Because the next thing that happened wasn't a court hearing. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't a plea. It was a gathering, a room, a table, and a man holding a document he never wanted to read. Because when Billy Crystal finally stood up to read Rob Reiner's will aloud, one paragraph in particular made the room go completely still. And the moment he reached the final sentence, everything changed. What if the most powerful moment in a murder investigation came not in a courtroom, but at a table with a single man reading a final letter? No judge, no jury, no defense, just the cracking voice of Billy Crystal and the last words of his oldest friend. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Rob Reiner was supposed to live to see his grandchildren. He was supposed to retire in peace. He was supposed to leave behind movies, memories, and laughter. Instead, he left a sealed envelope, handwritten, signed, and marked with a chilling instruction. To be read only if I die unexpectedly. Read aloud. By Billy. The gathering no one wanted to attend. The Reiner estate was filled with flowers that morning, not for celebration, but condolence. The smell of roses mixed with the weight of grief. Silent hallways. Black cars parked neatly on the circular drive. Everyone was there. Jake Reiner, stone-faced and quiet. Romy, sunglasses on indoors. Tracy, standing alone near the fireplace, distant, unreadable. And of course, Nick was not in attendance. He was behind bars, unaware of what was about to be said or what it would mean. The legal team had reviewed the trust, but there was one envelope left untouched, the one Rob had written by hand and given to his attorney 2 weeks before his death. He had said, "Give this to Billy. No one else opens it. Ever." And now, Billy Crystal stood at the front of the room, envelope in hand, shaking. He didn't want to read it. He dreaded reading it. But he loved Rob. And Rob had asked. Billy's opening words. Billy cleared his throat. Everyone leaned forward. The only sound was a clock ticking above the grand piano. "I never thought I'd be standing here like this," Billy began. He was a brother to me. I loved him. I admired him. I learned from him. And now, he's left me with one last job. He unfolded the letter. The pages had been folded into thirds. The edges were worn. The ink smudged in one corner, possibly from Rob's own hand. Billy glanced around the room. And then, he began to read. The letter. "If you're hearing this, then I'm gone. To my family, and to the people I love most in this world. If you're hearing this, then I'm gone. And not in the way I ever wanted to be." Gasps. Silent tears. A hand covered someone's mouth. "This letter isn't about dividing up my money. It's about what matters more, the truth. And I have to say this now, because there are things I never said out loud." Billy's voice cracked. But he kept reading. The revelations begin. "To Jake, I'm proud of you. You've become the man I always hoped you would. Strong, grounded, honest. I hope you know how much I respected you. To Romy, you always had the kindest heart. You saw beauty in the world even when it felt cold. Don't let this break you. To Tracy, you're my firstborn, and I know our lives took different paths, but I always loved you. Always." There was a pause in the room. Then Billy's hands visibly trembled as he read the next part. To Nick, I don't know what to say that I haven't already said 1,000 times in 1,000 ways. I love you. I do. But I don't know if that was ever enough for you. You always felt left out. Even when we tried. Even when we bent the world for you. But there are things I can't ignore anymore. The turn, a father's warning. Billy's eyes darted to the lawyers. One of them nodded solemnly, as if to say, keep going. You've said things, Nick, in anger. In pain. Things that scared your mother. You've broken things. Shouted threats. You've made us feel like strangers in our own home. I always defended you. Maybe I shouldn't have. But if something happens to me or your mother, and I pray it never does, then this letter becomes part of my truth. I don't want you to inherit anything that would reward hate, or violence, or vengeance. And if you're reading this, Nick, and if you're involved, then I hope you know this isn't just about money. It's about trust. And you broke it. The room goes still. You could hear the shift in the air. Romy looked away. Jake stared at the floor. Tracy crossed her arms. No emotion, just cold resolve. Billy paused. His face was flushed, but his voice never broke. He read the final section aloud, word for word. If Nick is found responsible for my death or Michelle's in any way, direct or indirect, I authorize the full and permanent removal of his name from all trusts, wills, and insurance policies. Let the others decide how to divide what remains. This is not punishment. It's protection. For the family. For the legacy. For peace. The aftermath. Billy folded the letter. Slowly. Reverently. No one clapped. No one moved. Tracy turned and walked out. Jake followed moments later. Romy stayed in her seat, frozen. No one spoke for nearly 5 minutes. The attorney stepped forward, cleared his throat, and confirmed the letter had been notarized, dated, and filed alongside Rob's official trust revisions. It had legal weight. It would be honored. Nick Reiner, by his father's own hand, was officially disinherited, pending conviction. And even if he was found innocent, trustees now had Rob's written instruction to remove him anyway. Why did Rob choose Billy? That question lingered after the reading. Why not a lawyer? Why not Tracy or Jake? Why Billy? Because Rob knew Billy was the only person with enough emotional gravitas to deliver the message without filtering it. Rob didn't want a courtroom. He wanted a conversation. He wanted truth spoken by someone who had no stake, only love. Billy wasn't just a performer. He was a historian, a guardian, a voice for the voiceless. And on that day, he became the voice of Rob's final request. A letter, or a verdict. The legal implications were immediate. The trust was officially rewritten. Nick was removed. Jake, Romy, and Tracy were granted trustee influence, along with one other name, Rob's longtime lawyer, who would now serve as lead executor. But emotionally, the impact ran deeper. This wasn't just a father writing his son out of the will. It was a man begging for peace, while knowing full well it might never come. The world reacts. When news leaked about the contents of the letter, headlines exploded. Reiner letter reveals tension, suspicions. Billy Crystal reads final message from murdered star. Nick Reiner disinherited by father's hand. Legal analysts called it unprecedented. Never before had such a personal message played such a pivotal role in a criminal case and estate distribution simultaneously. But the public? They were divided. Some saw it as justice. Others saw it as betrayal. And some wondered, if Rob knew Nick was dangerous, why didn't he do more? Why didn't he warn the police? Why didn't he file a restraining order? Why didn't he protect Michelle? But maybe Rob thought the letter would be enough. Or maybe he just ran out of time. The silence after. Billy Crystal never spoke publicly again about the letter. He declined interviews, turned down offers to appear on shows, gave no statements. His last words, as he left the estate that day, were overheard by a gardener near the carport. He reportedly said, he didn't want vengeance. He just wanted the family to stay whole. But I think he knew it never would. But what came next would add an even darker dimension to this story. A voice recording, hidden in a safe, that Rob had recorded just days before his death. Not a letter, not a note, but his own voice, revealing fears, confessions, and one final warning about the man who now stood accused of ending his life. What if your last act on earth wasn't to make peace, but to leave a warning? Rob Reiner didn't just write a letter. He left behind something even more intimate, something chilling. Something meant only for those closest to him. Or perhaps not meant to be heard at all. His voice. A message recorded and stored in a private, fireproof safe. Undiscovered until after the funeral. Uncovered because of a single line in his final written instructions. If I am gone, and gone suddenly. There's a file labeled Midnight Notes in the office safe. Give it to Tracy. She'll know what to do. What was on that file? Why did Rob record it? And what did it reveal that a letter couldn't? This was not a story told through speculation. This was Rob Reiner, in his own words, from beyond the grave. And the truth he shared would crack this case wide open. The safe in the study. The office where Rob and Michelle Reiner were murdered was once a creative sanctuary. Books on every wall. Movie posters framed in minimalist gold. A desk stacked with film treatments, legal papers, and, unknown to anyone, a locked sentry safe bolted to the bottom left panel of the shelving unit. It was Tracy who remembered it. She told investigators that her father kept personal, midnight musings, private audio notes he sometimes made when he couldn't sleep. Observations, creative ideas, even philosophical rants. They were his therapy, but apparently, they were also his insurance policy. After confirming the safe's code, the executor opened it. Inside, a portable digital recorder, a flash drive labeled Midnight Notes, and a sealed envelope addressed to Tracy. The envelope read, "If you're hearing me say this, I failed to protect us." Tracy's decision. The decision to share the audio was Tracy's. She could have kept it private, could have destroyed it, could have left it locked away in grief. But she didn't. Instead, she gave it to the lead investigator and said, "I want you to hear what he feared, what he knew, and why I think this wasn't just an act of rage, but something far more complicated." The memo was timestamped. December 16th, 8 days before the murders. Recorded at 2:12 a.m. Rob's voice was tired, slow, but clear, unmistakable. It began with a sigh. Then the truth. Rob's voice. "I'm not paranoid. I'm just done ignoring it. If anyone ever hears this, I guess something went wrong. I'm not paranoid. I don't think I am. But something's off. Michelle feels it too. Nick's not well. I wish I could say otherwise. God knows I've tried. But there's something building in him. Something I can't get to. He talks in riddles now. Like we've betrayed him. Like we owe him something he's convinced we're hiding." Michelle found one of his drawings. It was dark. Scary. He denied it, but I know it was his. She asked me, "Do you think he'd ever hurt us?" And I told her, "I don't know anymore." That line, "I don't know anymore," became the turning point. Until that moment, no one had evidence that Rob feared his son. But here it was. Spoken. Preserved. Not written by a lawyer. Not filtered through courts. But raw, unedited confession. And what came next was even more devastating. The threats. "He said something to Jake last week. Something that bothered me. You'll get yours." That's what he said. Over nothing. Over a stupid TV segment. But it was the look in his eyes. Like he meant it. Like he already decided what yours meant. "He's been wandering the house late at night. We hear the doors. Sometimes the gate code's been changed. He says it's for security. But I think he's testing us." Tracy's been worried too. She saw something in his eyes at Thanksgiving. She said, "Dad, you need to secure the estate." I laughed at the time. I'm not laughing now. The plans Rob never got to finish. Rob's voice, halfway through the recording, changed tone. He shifted from reflective to determined. "I've told the lawyer to update the trust. I'm moving assets. I'm narrowing access. If anything happens to me, Tracy has the backup. Password's the same. She knows the one. There's a copy of this recording on the drive. If it's found, don't let Nick near the estate. Don't let him lawyer his way in. This isn't about revenge. It's about safety. Jake deserves peace. Romy needs protection. Michelle." He pauses here. You can hear him exhale. Michelle's scared. And I hate that. I hate that I didn't raise him better. I hate that love wasn't enough. The final minutes of the recording. The final portion of the voice memo is nearly silent. Rob doesn't speak for several seconds. The only sound is the hum of a heater and the occasional click of a pen. Then, finally, he speaks again, quieter than before. "Nick, if you're hearing this, it means you did something I begged you never to do. You hurt us. And all I can say now is this. I forgive you, but I won't protect you anymore. We loved you, but we were afraid. And I'm sorry it came to this. You were our son. But now, you're the storm we couldn't outrun. Click. The audio ends. The immediate impact. Once the recording was authenticated and introduced to the legal proceedings, everything changed. Prosecutors amended their timeline to reflect premeditation. The Slayer's statute application became irreversible. The trust was amended, per Rob's audio confirmation, and the court of public opinion turned, not with fury, but with heartbreak. This wasn't a tale of a bad seed. It was a tragedy, a family that tried and lost. Even critics of Rob, those who had previously asked, why didn't he warn anyone, went silent. Because he did warn someone. He warned everyone. He just ran out of time. Media reaction. When news of the voice memo leaked, against Tracy's wishes, it dominated headlines for weeks. Rob Reiner predicted his own murder in heartbreaking audio. Rob Reiner's final words, a plea, a warning, a goodbye. Tracy Reiner hands over memo that changes everything. Podcast hosts analyzed every syllable. Criminal profilers praised Rob's clarity. Mental health experts debated his guilt and grief. But most people just wept. They listened to a man who loved his child, but feared him. And they asked the question no parent wants to face. What would you do if your child became your greatest danger? Tracy's public statement. A week after the audio memo was confirmed, Tracy Reiner released a written statement. My father was a man of compassion, a man of peace. He spent his life giving people voices. In the end, he gave one to himself. I wish he hadn't needed to, but I'm grateful we heard it. She made no further comments. She attended no further press events. She went back to court, into silence. But by then, the damage had been done. Or, perhaps, the truth had finally broken free. The strange redaction. One final mystery. According to investigators, the version of the voice memo found in the safe had a slightly longer runtime than the copy stored on Rob's flash drive. Only by 11 seconds. But what was in those missing seconds? A whisper? A name? A secret? No one knows. The flash drive version ends abruptly, just after the line, "You're the storm we couldn't outrun."